Paper remembers what people forget. It holds signatures, promises, debts, tiny strokes of ink that once moved entire economies. Before screens glowed and numbers traveled at the speed of light, power passed quietly from hand to hand on thin slips of paper. Checks, ordinary, boring, invisible. Yet behind those slips was an empire, built not on banks or vaults, but on trust, repetition, and scale. While the world chased faster money, someone mastered slower money. And in that slowness, they found control. So how did a company most people never think about end up touching nearly every dollar that moved through America? Luxe Corp, a name few recognize but whose presence reverberates through the very backbone of global finance. In the shadow of towering banks and flashy tech startups, this humble company quietly dominates a market that few even realize exists. Founded in 1915, Luxe began as a small operation crafting check printing solutions for local banks. At first glance, it was just another supplier in the financial ecosystem. But what made them different was their vision. This wasn't just about printing checks. It was about owning the infrastructure of a financial transaction itself. Today, Luxe's influence stretches beyond mere paper and ink. It owns a commanding share of the global check printing industry, a market worth billions. Checks may seem outdated in our digital age, but in 2023, nearly 20 billion checks are written every year in the United States alone. Luxe prints a significant portion of those checks, which means they literally hold the keys to an invisible transaction system, one that links consumers, corporations, and governments in a complex dance of trust and exchange. But as we'll discover, the story of Luxe is not just about numbers or transactions. It's about an unseen empire quietly pulling the strings behind the scenes. So why, in an age of cryptocurrency, digital wallets, and instant transfers, does Luxe still reign supreme? The answer lies in the subtle mechanisms of power, control, and legacy, things that the world of fast money often forgets to account for. Every empire begins with a seed, and for Luxe Corp, that seed was ink on paper. In the early 20th century, America's financial system was growing faster than anyone could manage. Banks multiplied, payrolls expanded, and businesses demanded a reliable way to move money without physically transporting coins or notes. In 1915, a small workshop in Chicago began experimenting with high-quality check printing. The founder, a meticulous printer named Charles Luxe, recognized a gap. Banks needed not just checks, but a guarantee that each check could withstand scrutiny, fraud, and the daily grind of commerce. By 1920, Luxe had perfected a system of security features, watermarks, special inks, and patterned backgrounds that made checks more than paper. They became a trusted vessel for money. It was a quiet innovation, invisible to the public eye but monumental in its implications. Every feature was designed to prevent loss, reduce fraud, and create confidence in the system, a confidence that would later underpin an empire. Early partnerships with regional banks cemented the company's foothold. While other businesses chased immediate profit through flashy ventures, Luxe invested in trust and reliability. A blueprint was laid quietly: dominate through consistency, not spectacle. By the time the Great Depression arrived, the company's reputation for flawless execution had become a lifeline for struggling banks. And in an era when financial institutions were collapsing daily, Luxe wasn't just surviving, they were quietly positioning themselves to become indispensable. Here, in these early decades, we see the invisible architecture forming. An empire built not on dominance or aggression, but on being the silent, trusted backbone of financial transactions, a structure that would allow the company to wield influence far beyond what anyone could have imagined at the time. The real rise of Luxe Corp began in the post-World War II era, a time when America itself was redefining its financial identity. The economy was booming, businesses expanded, and the payroll system exploded. Millions of employees now relied on regular paychecks, a simple slip of paper that carried their livelihood. And Deluxe was there, quietly printing the trust that flowed through every hand. By the 1950s, the company had secured contracts with nearly every major bank in the United States. This wasn't luck, it was strategy. Not growth, but consolidation. Not innovation, but control. They standardized check designs, security features, and printing processes. Banks that once sourced checks from multiple suppliers were now locked into Deluxe's system. Each contract reinforced the next, creating a web of dependencies invisible to the public eye. The 1970s brought a technological shift. Magnetic ink character recognition, MICR, transformed how checks were processed. Instead of manual sorting, machines could read numbers encoded in special ink, drastically increasing speed and accuracy. While competitors scrambled to adapt, Deluxe invested heavily in research and infrastructure, ensuring they weren't just participants, they were leaders. Their early adoption gave them leverage, enabling them to dictate standards that competitors had no choice but to follow. Even in crises, the company thrived. During the banking crises of the 1980s and the financial deregulations that followed, Deluxe remained a constant. They were the quiet pillar that banks relied on, the infrastructure that could not fail. By the 1990s, they controlled a dominant share of the $5 billion U.S. check printing market, and international expansion began. Boardrooms and factories alike became scenes of calculated precision. Negotiations weren't just about price. They were about embedding Deluxe into the very DNA of financial operations. Through mergers, acquisitions, and exclusive contracts, the company transformed from a humble printer into a gatekeeper of trust, wielding influence that extended beyond paper into the broader financial ecosystem. And yet, through every expansion and technological leap, the public saw only a simple piece of paper, ignoring the empire silently growing beneath the surface. Beneath the surface of every paycheck, payroll system, and corporate reimbursement lies a hidden engine of profit, the mechanisms Deluxe mastered decades ago. On paper, they sell checks. In reality, they sell trust, standardization, and control over the movement of money itself. One of their most striking strategies is exclusivity. By standardizing check layouts and security features, they effectively created a network effect. Banks couldn't switch suppliers without disrupting their own operations. This invisible lock-in became a silent lever of power. Once a bank adopted Deluxe, leaving became costly, not just financially, but operationally. Another secret lies in economies of scale. Deluxe prints billions of checks annually, and each small design, each subtle security feature compounds profit. The margins on these transactions are small individually, but when multiplied across an entire nation, they become enormous. In 2020 alone, estimates suggest that Deluxe controlled over 60% of the U.S. check printing market, translating into hundreds of millions in annual revenue from a product most people consider obsolete. Beyond production, there is strategic pricing. Corporations that require specialized checks, payroll, treasury, or legal, pay a premium for reliability. Deluxe leverages trust to convert necessity into profit. And the psychological element is profound. People assume checks are uniform and interchangeable, but Deluxe ensures they aren't, at least not without their authorization. Even in the digital age, when checks are declining, Deluxe quietly extends influence into secure electronic transaction systems. The transition isn't abrupt, it's controlled. They embed themselves into modern workflows so that their legacy systems remain central, ensuring that every financial transaction, digital or analog, passes through an invisible web they've built over a century. In essence, Deluxe isn't just a company that prints paper. They are architects of financial trust, engineers of control, and custodians of an empire hidden in plain sight. Every check carries more than a number, it carries a story. For workers, it is a paycheck. For families, it is groceries, rent, and tuition. For businesses, it is payroll, supplier payments, and operational continuity. And through all of it flows Deluxe, often unseen, quietly shaping the rhythm of daily life. Consider the factory worker in Detroit, the teacher in Boston, or the nurse in Chicago. Their money doesn't just appear. It is processed, verified, and protected through systems that Deluxe built and controls. Every paycheck carries history, a century of trust embedded in ink and paper, a legacy of decisions made decades ago that ripple into the present. But the impact is not only transactional. By establishing reliability in financial instruments, Deluxe indirectly influenced corporate culture, labor relations, and societal expectations of financial security. Banks and companies structured their operations around the assumption that payments would be consistent and dependable. Communities, in turn, built lives atop that foundation. There are no clear heroes or villains in this story, only systems. A farmer mailing a check for seeds, a startup issuing payroll, a global corporation settling invoices. They all interact with Deluxe's invisible infrastructure, often without realizing it. Wealth, stability, and even trust are constructed, not accidental. And while the world debates flashy tech and volatile markets, the quiet backbone endures, influencing behaviors, shaping opportunity, and reinforcing a system most people never see but everyone relies upon. The empire is human at its core, because without the people using it, the paper, ink, and infrastructure mean nothing. And yet, the empire exists precisely because of its ability to operate beyond the spotlight, balancing invisibility with indispensability. From a small Chicago workshop to a global financial backbone, the story of Luxe Corp is a reminder that power often hides in plain sight. What seems ordinary, paper, ink, and numbers, can quietly shape economies, influence behavior, and anchor trust across generations. We've traced the journey from early innovations through technological revolutions to the subtle mechanisms that maintain dominance even in the digital era. Every check printed, every security feature implemented, every strategic partnership formed was a step toward an empire few notice, but billions rely upon. So the next time a paycheck arrives or a check is deposited, consider this. You are touching the work of an empire built over a century, one that moves silently behind the scenes, shaping the world's financial flow. How much of what we trust is visible, and how much remains hidden in systems we never question? The story of Deluxe is still unfolding. Banks evolve, technology accelerates, and yet the invisible threads of trust and control remain, quietly directing the course of money and influence. If this journey through the hidden empire intrigued you, share your thoughts below. Comment, like, and subscribe to explore more stories where money, strategy, and unseen power intersect. Because the truth about wealth often lies not in what we see, but in what we never stop to ask.